Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is the concept of accidentals. Right? So these are symbols that we're adding to a note to ask the performer to raise or lower a pitch by a half step, or in some cases by 2 half steps or a whole step. So the symbols that we use are on the textbook in open music theory, and they include the flat, the natural, the sharp, the double sharp, and the double flat. Okay, so accidentals are used to indicate when a pitch has been raised or lowered by 1 or 2 half steps. Right, so let's start with finding the C again. So that's what we began with. So again, we look at the group of 2 black keys, and I'm going 1 half step below the black key on the left. So that's C. Now, if I'm raising this C by 1 half step, I can describe this key, this piano key, as C sharp. Right? So when you're raising one of the white notes of the piano by a half step, you add a sharp. So you can say C sharp. Now, when we're writing this out in a sentence, we put the accidental after the note name, C sharp. But when we're writing it on the staff, the sharp little pound symbol or hashtag actually goes before the note, so to the left of the note. Okay, you'll see that as we look at some more music. Okay, so again, this is C. So then we're raising it 1 half step. This is called C sharp. Okay, if we're raising a note that's already sharp by another half step, okay, so let's say I start with a C sharp and we're raising it by 1 more, right, half step. Okay, I can then call this C double sharp. Now notice that this is also describing the note D. Okay, so it depends on the context of what we're trying to describe, and this will come into play more when we talk about intervals, chords, triads, and 7th chords. But for now, note that there are keys, essentially all of them have multiple names. It depends on what you're trying to describe. If I'm trying to describe this note on the piano in terms of C, I can call it C double sharp. But of course, it's the same pitch as D. So this is the concept of enharmonics, enharmonic equivalence, which I'll loop back at the end of the video. So again, I raise this pitch C 1 half step to C sharp. And then if I'm raising C sharp by 1 half step, this is C double sharp. Conversely, if I start with, let's say if I start with D, and I'm lowering this pitch by 1 half step, going to the next adjacent key below, then we can describe this as D flat. Notice that we've also talked about this as C sharp. So again, this key has 2 names. Okay, and then this, if we're lowering D flat by 1 half step, okay, then we're looking at this as D double flat. Okay, so D flat, D double flat. And one more symbol here called the natural, and that's when you're raising a note that's already flat by a half step. Okay, then that becomes a natural. Essentially, it cancels out the flat, and then also consequently, when you lower a note that's already sharp by a half step, you use the natural. For example, if I start with F sharp, I'm calling this F sharp because this is F, and this is 1 half step above F. So it's F sharp. If I start with F sharp and I'm lowering it by a half step, then I can call this F natural. Okay, and depending on the situation, you can also just call it F. Same idea here. If I start with A flat. Okay, so this is A flat. If I am raising it by a half step, a note that's already flat, now I'm at A natural. Okay. Now, I talked about something called enharmonic equivalence a little bit earlier on this video, and you can go back to the keyboard chart that's posted on Open Music Theory. Some of these keys, or essentially most of them, all of them actually, they have different names because it depends on what we're trying to describe in how we're trying to describe each key. Okay? So for example, this black key here, the one to the left of the group of 2 black keys, this is either C sharp or D flat. Okay. Consequently, you've noticed that we talked about there are 2 pairs of white keys that don't have a black key in the middle between them. Okay, so here's E and F. Right. So this of course, is an F, but we can also describe this as E sharp, okay, because this is 1/2 step above E. Okay, so this is also can be described as E sharp. And the opposite of that, this E can also be described as 1/2 step below F, which is F flat. Okay, so that's introduction to how we use something called accidentals to manipulate pitches by half steps or groups of, or 1/2 step or 2/2 steps. And then also, by extension, how they create different names for the same button, the same key on the keyboard, and that's called enharmonic equivalence.